Today we have Todd here from Reserve Advisors. This is a class that a lot of you have asked for. We always take feedback at seminars to see what you're interested in the most. And this was something of high demand, especially with legislation coming here in Michigan about reserve studies. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Todd and let him enlighten you with his geniusness.
Thank you. We appreciate that. Thank you guys for joining us here today. I really appreciate it. Kudos to KS Management. These board education seminars are quite rare. So I think it's just been fantastic that they provide just this type of education.
Thanks, Todd. I appreciate that.
Uh-oh.
I got you.
Right away. Oh, perfect. Very good. I started conducting reserve studies and reserve advisors in 1999. I'm a licensed professional engineer in the state of Michigan, and I've done a lot for reserve advisors over the years, but I still like doing these reserve studies. So whatever I do for reserve advisors moving forward, I still get to visit a property like yours each week because I very much enjoy it. Even though I've been at our headquarters in Milwaukee since 1999, I'm actually originally from Toledo, so not that far away.
We won't fault you. Everyone's gonna say.
Totally.
Well, that's 50 to least 50-50. I mean, it's not all Buckeye fans out there. So, for those of you that attended the CAI Michigan trade show a few weeks ago, or if you attended the KS Expo last year, you may recognize some of these slides. But I did mix in quite a few new ones, quite a few new content there as well. This topic here today, capital planning, reserves, reserve studies, I think it's always been an important topic. But I think there's a renewed focus on this topic. Any guesses as what may have occurred over the past few years to renew the focus on this topic? I'll give you a clue. One is going to be really easy and really fast. The other ones maybe not. They're a little bit more under the weather.
Did it have something to do with the study that was done on the building that collapsed in Florida?
Absolutely. So that's the easy one, right? That's the unfortunate tower that collapsed Surfside in Florida. There's some other tougher ones though that have reviewed this focus as well. Fannie and Freddie, their lending regulations and changes to their lending regulations. More and more states around the country that are requiring reserve studies. The bottom of this slide shows several states that have recently enacted legislation to require reserve studies. New Jersey just a few months ago, Tennessee last year. Michigan is inches away from requiring this legislation as well. Illinois has started it. Wisconsin has started it. So there's quite a snowball effect around the country with requiring reserve studies so that people can make informed decisions as to how they're going to pay for their big ticket projects that are coming up. And this discussion here today, tough conversation in every community, like how are you going to pay for your big ticket projects? Roofing, pavement, siding, funding those big ticket projects, that's why you guys get paid the big bucks as board members. And it's a challenging conversation in every community and best done over cocktails because it's a really tough one. It can be a really long conversation. So you got a big ticket project coming up. Before I flip to the next slide, any guesses what the funding mechanisms are? What funding mechanisms are available to you to pay for those projects when the time comes?
Assessments.
Special assessment, yeah, okay. That's one, yeah.
HOA.
A good
Reserve.
healthy reserve.
Yes, thank you. That's always last, and I always get frustrated because that's last. So thank you for making it second. And then we're missing one more funding mechanism. And goals, yes, well done, good job. Or a combination of those three, right? And I suppose you could do wait for hail damage as well.
Maybe a bake sale.
Yeah, right. So once about every 5 years, someone calls us up and says, hey, I want you to take the roofs out of the reserve study because we're going to wait for hail damage. And they're serious. And of course we can't do that. So there are lots and lots of theories out there as to what the best way of paying for these projects is. One of those theories is by setting aside appropriate annual reserves, you ensure that everybody pays for their fair share of the weathering and aging of the association maintained components each year they live in their unit. In other words, they pay for the use of those association maintained components each year they live there. Now that's a key concept. If you're somebody in this room or online that believes in setting aside appropriate reserves, convincing people that they're paying for the use of that component, as opposed to setting aside money for a project could be way down the road where they may or may not live there to see the project. That's a key concept, that use. So in other words, if something has a 20-year useful life, you're essentially setting aside 1/20th of that cost each year. Now, what's challenging in your communities is you're gonna have people all over the place on that concept. Guaranteed, maybe some of you in this room, you know what, I'm not gonna live there 5 years from now when you do roofs. Board needs money, I'll be the first guy to write you a check. But I don't wanna set aside money for a project I'm not gonna see. My personal favorite, in addition to that, I can manage my money better than the board can. Okay, the board needs money, give them money. But I can manage, I wanna keep my money if the board needs it. My favorite opposition came from an old guy in Florida who said, you know what, I'll be dead in 5 years now. That's my kids probably figure out pay for it. And look, I get it. I understand where they're coming from. But when you rely on a special assessment, you rely on a loan or an additional assessment, those terms kind of interchangeable, in my personal opinion, you defer the cost burden the owners are there at that point in time. The people that at that point in time, the project, that assessment, that loan, those owners are taking on that cost burden. The people who got prior to that project will have gotten off on paying for their fair share, whether it's paying for the use. Now I get that's really easy for me to sit up here and say that, just push pay for the use. Much harder in actual reality, because you are going to have people on all sides of this market. And yet what happens come budget season, especially during COVID, during the pandemic? What's the first thing that gets cut or not increased? The reserve contribution. During COVID, difficult financial times for everybody, boards wanted to give people a break. They didn't raise that reserve contribution, or they cut that reserve contribution. And unfortunately now, these communities are having to come back and take on these capital projects. They can't wait any longer, and they don't have the funds to do the project. So there's a lot of trouble out there. So how much you set aside? There is this tendency at times to tie in some way a percent of the annual operating budget to a reserve contribution or a reserve balance. And Michigan's one of those states that ties that in some way. And there's lots of twists and turns here. Fannie, Freddie, they tie it in some way. FHA, they tie it in some way. But if you sit back and you think about it, what does the size of your operating budget have to do with the cost to replace your roofs or your pavement? And the answer is nothing. So this entire concept of a percent of the operating budget towards a reserve balance or a contribution did a real disservice in the industry. Because guess what happens? A lot of people put away 10%, I'm doing just fine. In over 31,000 studies we've done, I'm not so sure there's one case where 10% is sufficient. There's just too many variables that go into determining how much to put away to have one size fits all percentage. Every community is going to be different. So there's a couple points I'd like to make on this slide here. The blue line represents your reserve balances over time. The red bars represent your reserve expenditures over time. For aging communities, those red bars can get really big, really scary. But notice the blue line, the appropriate reserve balance, it varies a lot based on where you're at with your expenditures. So some of the biggest mistakes we see are, first of all, associations eyeballing the reserve balance. They'll say, hey, we got 500,000 in the bank, aren't we doing well? Well, knowing a reserve balance without knowing where you're at with your expenditures is completely meaningless. And yet everybody does it, from board members to managers to accountants to attorneys. I believe there might be some realtors in the room, and I apologize to the realtors if you're in the room, but realtors seem to be the worst at that, at eyeballing these reserve balances. Everyone
looks at Chris.
How can everybody eyeball that reserve balance that I can't? When we start a reserve study, you give me that balance, and it comes with a comment like, are we doing really well? Well, I have no idea. I have no idea to actually lay out your expenditures. Another common mistake, again, notice the blue line varies quite greatly, is targeting the same reserve balance each year, regardless of where you're at with their expenditures. They'll say, hey, we want to have 500,000 in the bank at all times. Well, is it 500,000 before? I suppose if you have a 500,000 and that's the very top of your blue line, you're probably okay. But nobody does that. 500,000 is somewhere down below where they run into trouble because they're targeting 500,000, and in reality they need $1 billion some of these years because of the big expenditures. The other part I would like to point out here is that we build our reserve contributions towards those low points in the blue line. And so With the low points in mind, if you're a community and you have to take on a project, big ticket project, but you don't have the money, what's the very first thing the board president says? The very first thing. I wish, but no, it's not. It's the answer, in my opinion, is let's phase the project. Let's do little bits at a time. Let's take this on little chunks at a time. Phasing a project, that's always the answer. That's their first answer. Phasing a project helps you if you're phasing past the low point of that blue line. If you're phasing prior to the low point of blue line, you're just costing yourself money because you're paying for mobilization over and over again. You're cheating yourself out of that contract to giving you the best unit cost for that project. And yet everybody does it. I'm working with a community now, high-rise community. They have significant masonry facade issues. They have for a long time. They phase their masonry restoration over so many years that now they're not even done, and they got to come back to the first phase because there's problems in water infiltration. So I get that phasing, when you don't have the money, it's what everybody's go-to is, but you could be hurting yourself. You could be costing yourself in the long run. It's not always the answer. A reserve study is the tool that determines the appropriate annual reserve contributions to fund the expenditures. But more than that, a reserve study simply allows you to make an informed decision. If you're somebody who thinks reserves are the way to go, that's how you want to pay for these projects. Take the rough cost by number. The study will give you those annual contributions. If you think special assessments are the better way to go, take the rough cost by number of units as your possible special assessment. If you think reserves are the way to go, but you think, hey, that reserve study guy's nuts, we can't raise our fees that amount. How about a combination, about 50% from reserves, maybe rolling the dice and have a special assessment of the rest. Believe it or not, I don't care how you guys pay for these projects. I'm just here to help you make an informed decision, to have a financial game plan in place. Some of our best clients, going back to 1991, they take our reserve funding plan and it goes in the garbage because they special assess for everything. Fine with me, it doesn't care. Doesn't matter to me. So we'll hit on that idea here a little bit more detail in a moment. So my personal opinion, one of the biggest reasons associations don't conduct reserve studies is because they're afraid of the results. But will that last longer or cost less if you have your head in the sand and you don't know what's coming down the line? Of course it won't. So one of the questions I ask every community who has not had a reserve study is, how come budget season, you're plugging in that reserve contribution line, how are you determining what that should be? And thankfully, a lot of people are just, we're just guessing, or we really have no idea. But there's so many people out there that gives all kinds of weird twists and turns as to how they're figuring that out. Anything short of, we gave an estimate of the expenditures and they ran a cash flow on those expenditures is just guessing.
Show of hands, who's had a reserve study in the last 3 years?
That's pretty consistent. And 2 weeks ago, CAI Michigan, I didn't talk to a single property manager who had more than half of their portfolio had a reserve study, a recent reserve study. We're going to get into that, if that's normal or not, a little bit down the road in Michigan. So why conduct a reserve study? And again, it's back to that, it's budgeting season, and you're trying to figure out that annual reserve contribution. This study simply allows you to make an informed decision. Again, it doesn't matter to me if you plug in that reserve contribution or not. I just want you to make an informed decision of what's possibly coming down the line. My personal opinion, we'll get into that. So maintaining property value, structural integrity, that's buzzwords nowadays. But one of the more important components here, you see the word independent on there twice. So an independent opinion of how long we think something's going to last and what those possible costs are. Need a repair, need a replacement. Being independent can help you come budgeting season if there is a need to increase the dues, increase the fees. You have an independent engineer that's giving you this opinion that, hey, your roofs are coming close to being due. You guys should start thinking about how you're going to pay these projects. If it is reserves, we need to raise our reserve contributions. It's not just the board president wanted to be mean and raise reserves. Raising reserve contribution, there's backing to that. Simply put, a reserve study provides you with a independent opinion of adequate reserve contributions to fund your reserve expenditures. Now, again, that's if the board decides they want to try to use reserves for these projects as opposed to those other funding mechanisms. It is simply sufficient funds to cover your reserve contribution, your reserve expenditures without having to use a loan or without having to use a special assessment. And within our reserve studies, if it's a near-term project, we build in special assessments and loans all the time. Because a lot of communities, there's no option. It's too late to raise your reserves. So we'll show a loan, we'll show a special assessment. We can certainly help with that as well. So I want to take a little detour here in light of the tower that collapsed in Florida. Most reserve state providers, the bigger reserve state providers, see far more properties each year than the structural engineering firms do. And so we're in a unique position to identify conditions that are abnormal or conditions that warrant bringing in a specialist. If it's a foundation issue and it's abnormal, it's atypical in our experience, bring in a foundation specialist. You can think of that as reserve state providers being the primary care doctor and being in a good position to recommend a specialist. After that tower collapsed, the American Society of Engineers, they published this article that structural integrity, likely part of that is engineers and experts collaborating with each other. And we certainly want to know, work with your community, we want, if you have an inspection, roof inspection report, we want to consider that. You have a foundation report, we want to consider that. So certainly gathering all of your experts, their opinions, their inspections, and putting it in one financial game plan is a benefit of a reserve study. I was on a webinar, I believe it was a year and a half ago, a national reserve state provider was in a national CAI webinar. And this national reserve state provider made the comment that if your reserve study is challenging to fund, just defer projects until it gets better. I couldn't believe that. Do you know how easy my job would be if that was the case? Everyone would love us. No one would get mad at us for giving them bad news. That's just simply not the case. Unfortunately, there are a lot of communities out there where they're even deferring projects. They're in trouble. They're in financial trouble. They're the bearer of bad news a lot of times. And we get brought into a lot of these board meetings to be that kind of independent source. It only happened to me once, and it was early in my career. It was like 2000. But I'd been to a board meeting. I pulled up. It was a townhome type community, and there's a clubhouse in the middle. And I pulled up. I'd only been working at this company for like a year and a half, something like that. I pulled into the community, and there was a line to get into the clubhouse. And I knew I was going to be in trouble. And I knew that they had T111 siding, which I hope you guys don't know what that is because it was all gone. It's old plywood siding. They had bad roofs. They had no money. So they're siding and roofs together. They had no money. It was very low income. They were going to have a special assess for it. And the board needed backing. Like they needed us to back why they were doing that. And I walk in the clubhouse and they had security guards on both sides of the doors. First one time I've ever seen that. I mean, it was ugly. It was a clubhouse packed with people. It was really bad. Something I'll never forget, for sure.
That was the fault of years before that.
Pardon me?
That was the fault of years before that.
Yeah,
Not taking care of things.
Oh, absolutely. Great
Yeah.
point. Because people weren't paying for the use all along. And yeah, I feel terrible for those owners because they're getting hit more than their fair share. So this is obviously really bad, right? It should have been fixed a long time ago. This is an elevated garage floor at a condominium association. Board knew they had a problem. So we may never know why that tower collapsed in Florida. But what we do know there wasn't that board in Florida, there was this board paralysis that we see all the time. Where the board knew they had a problem. They knew what they needed to do to fix it. They knew the cost. They didn't have the money to do it. They didn't have the reserves. They didn't want special assess. They wouldn't take out a loan. So they did nothing. Or board members argue amongst each other as to how someone wants to use reserves, one wants to do special assess, one wants to take a loan. So they argue amongst each other and they do nothing year after year after year. That was present at that Surfside building. They knew several years ago what they had to do. They knew the cost. They did nothing. And I believe when the tower collapsed, it was like 16 million. When they first learned about it, I think it was like something like 7 billion to fix. We see issues far worse than at Surfside all the time. So the garage on the left, it obviously did collapse. That was near Cleveland. Same thing, board paralysis. Board knew they had a problem. They knew what they needed to do to fix it. They didn't have the money, so they did nothing. Year after year, it collapsed. Thankfully, nobody was hurt. The wall on the right did collapse onto that sidewalk. Thankfully, no one was hurt. And the story there was a board member that was an engineer and said, you know what, that wall's been leaning for a long time. It's not going anywhere. It's
Smart engineer.
Smart engineer. Mark the ball.
Yeah.
Let's hire him.
They need a new CEO, right?
Yeah. So obviously could have been quite a disaster here. And because it's on everyone's mind, I wanted to just briefly touch upon legislation in Florida in the past. I mean, obviously they were the first to jump on legislation. So first of all, the original legislation that passed required a licensed professional engineer in the state of Florida to conduct the study. They quickly realized that there weren't enough licensed PEs in Florida that wanted to do reserve studies to make that work. So they since changed that to be an RS. You can get an RS designation from CAI. But the point is an engineer doing these studies, not an accountant, not an appraiser. Not that there's anything wrong with those professions, but the idea here was an engineer taking a look at their property, at least every so often, to ensure structural integrity. East of the Rocky Mountains, it was primarily engineers conducting these reserve studies. The debate in Florida wasn't whether to require reserve studies. The debate was whether to require funding. And in each of these states, New Jersey, Tennessee, that's the huge, actually here in Michigan too, that's the big debate, whether to require funding. Nobody's going to argue against making an informed decision, i.e. having a reserve study in front of you when you're making your decisions. The problem is you have to fund it. And Florida thought they were getting a compromise here when they passed legislation that requires 2 buckets within every reserve study. One bucket, when I say a bucket, I mean a reserve expenditures and then a cash flow off of those expenditures. One bucket is structural, and you can see in red what they quote structural. Condominium associations cannot waive funding for that. In a reserve study, they have to put away those contributions. The other bucket is everything else. Now, what's interesting to me is this other bucket has some really important stuff in it, like elevators, like pavement, like stuff you can't ignore. So everyone in Florida at the moment is putting all their money into the structural bucket because they have to fund those contributions. They're putting nothing towards everything else because they don't have to fund those contributions, and it's a complete mess. Not to mention the increases in fees, and if any of you own a condo in Florida, maybe you've experienced this already. 2, 3, 4 times the reserve contribution that they're currently putting away. Big increases in the operating budget. Not really feasible. And at the end of this, I'll save your questions. We can open up to any questions. So if you please just save your questions, and we'll certainly be able to hit upon them. We can come back to any of these topics as well. So I just want to put one little side note in here. Reserve studies include association maintained components only, not an owner maintained component. So we're insurance employers. So we rely on the board management to provide some guidance as to what's owner versus association. Hopefully that's based off of legal responsibility that Matrix, your attorney, put together. But one of the questions we ask is who maintains the windows? Who's legally responsible for the windows? And your reserve study is like night and day, depending on how you answer that question. The answer owner, that's pretty reserve study. The answer association can be quite ugly. So like that one component, which way that goes, has a huge impact on your reserve study. So every reserve study provider is going to, they're not going to miss roofs. They're not going to miss major mechanicals, right? Nobody's going to miss that. Nobody's going to miss concrete, balcony, facade, elevator controls. That's the picture on the left. I think there's kind of a high-rise theme to these pictures because that's mainly all what they do. But the concepts apply to everybody here. And speaking of that picture on the right, so nobody's going to miss roofing, major mechanicals, facade. Are they going to miss subsurface utility piping? Like the picture on the right. We get calls like regularly. Hey, our property was built in the 70s. We had a reserve study done by another company, and they had nothing in the study for subsurface utility piping. And now we're having to replace sections of it, and it's a lot of money. So can the reserve state provider, can that engineer properly assess things like subsurface domestic water piping, subsurface sanitary sewer piping, stormwater piping? Because unfortunately, that does come into play for older communities, and it can be crazy expensive. It's our opinion that reserve study providers should be independent. You should not have a reason to increase the costs, move a project up. That should be in right the specs, should be into managed projects. That you want to have somebody who can give you a completely independent opinion of the remaining useful lives of these components, the cost to repair and replace those components. So if we could predict exactly when your expenditures are going to occur, we'd be in the stock market, not conducting reserve studies. The timing of these projects are simply based on that reserve state provider's experience. Is one of the things that should be on the radar screen. Of course, we can't get the exact expenditure in the exact year. That's not the point of this study. Along those lines, one of our biggest clients, an executive at a very large national management company, and we're the preferred provider for this management company. We're the only reserve state provider for this company. So we get hundreds of thousands of dollars in reserve states from this one company every year. The executive said to me, he said, 90% of your costs are wrong. The first thing I thought is, well, this guy likes us, gives us all this business. Like, what if somebody who doesn't like us have to say? But that wasn't the point to get the exact expenditure. Exactly, he knew we couldn't do that. He knew his association did three things: kept up with preventative maintenance, got their reserve study updated at a good interval, and most importantly, put away those reserve contributions. They were going to do really well. And his communities did really well through COVID because they did those three things. It made his managers look good, it made his boards look good, it made his properties look good, and it made him look good. Now, some of these projects, we can also argue all day the times of these expenditures. You know, how bad the roofs need to be, or if you got a property with interior hallways, how bad the carpet in the hallways needs to be. Like, we could argue that all day. We probably have different opinions, but they don't last forever. Roofing doesn't last forever. Pavement doesn't last forever. It should be planned for as big ticket dollars when the time comes. I always, board members, managers, they'll quite frequently, they'll say, hey, you said we should replace our roofs in this year. No, that's not what we're saying. We didn't say that. We're simply saying it should be on your, based on our experience, the condition, the age, it should be on your radar screen for this point in time. So of course, we're not saying if it's on the radar screen for 2024, of course you don't have to do it in 2024. But that doesn't mean it's gonna last 10 years longer. It still should be somewhere in the near, it's likely gonna be somewhere in the near term, unless it's a discretionary project, of course. So the idea here, the concept of the costs that are included within a reserve study is to be all inclusive. So we just put in our reserve study cost for new asphalt shingles on your roofs, you're way off. So you're missing demolition, disposal of the old, sheathing, flashings, ventilation, mobilization, maybe even engineering. Like, the idea, what we're shooting for, we're trying for, is all-inclusive costs. Project cost is the cost for that project. Considerations also apply to prioritization of projects and combinations. So prioritization of projects, we want to see you prioritize projects that either A, if you defer them, will result in water filtration into your units, or B, if you defer them, will result in an increase in costs. So let's say you have poor condition masonry at your property, masonry facade on your buildings. It's not in great shape. That's a project that each year that goes by, those small cracks are going to become big cracks. Small items, small issues become bigger issues. Cost is going to go up. So when you do get the project, it could be a way higher. I do want to say that back to that comment about deferring, sometimes you can't defer your way out of stuff. Like, even discretionary projects, like, there's only so far we can defer them in our reserve study. Like, if you have a property with hallways, the carpeting, of course that's discretionary. But there is something to the aesthetics, maintaining positive aesthetics for prospective buyers. So if it's carpet hallways, your exterior lighting, like, it's not like you can just defer that indefinitely. So even the discretionary projects, they need to be out there somewhere. There is a limit to how far we would defer them, no matter how bad your financial conditions are. Combination of projects. So if you're painting your buildings for the year, you're painting your siding, your trim, how about combining that with replacement of sealants, caulking? How about combining that with replacement of deteriorating wood? So when you do have the opportunity to combine projects within your reserve study, you minimize that overall cost. That is something that should be considered. And I guess most of all, providers should be asking you about the hot topics. What's the hot topic of the negotiation? What's your biggest concern? And make sure that your concerns are addressed within that reserve study. It's tough sometimes to train our engineers, like we want them focusing on the big ticket projects, we want them focusing on roofing and pavement, but sometimes the mailboxes are the hot topic in the community. It's okay, you need to do justice to those mailboxes, because that's what's important. Another one where you can't defer forever, like I put the word Chicago up there because Chicago has a lot of reserve study providers, and they all use the cash flow method. Here in Michigan, the main providers also use the cash flow method. So east of the Rocky Mountains, you're going to primarily only see the cash flow analysis method of calculating your reserve contribution. And again, we build towards the low point in your cash flow, minimum thresholds. And that low point, how low you can go in your lowest years, that's a debatable topic. We'll give you our 2 cents worth, but certainly if you would like to give your opinion on that, like we can talk that through. If management has an opinion, let's talk that through, because there's no right or wrong answer there. Again, people get confused though. Let's say we have a minimum threshold of $50,000. That's only a good number in your minimum threshold, your low point, the lowest point. Any other year, you'd be way off. People get that confused a lot here. When there is a need for significant increases, we try our best to phase or step in the increases the best we can. But there's a limit to that. Each time you step or phase in your increases, you're pushing that cost burden down the road. So our personal pay is maybe 5 years. That's usually the ballpark how many steps or phases will go. I still to this day, if I'm doing a reserve study and it's bad funding, I think, what if I had family members living there? What can I do to help? Can I give them another step or two? Can I defer some of these discretionary projects? We certainly go through that process to help. But again, a lot of these communities, there's just nothing we can do. I was at a very contentious board meeting a couple months ago, and an attorney over funding. I mean, it's always unusual with funding. Association had a lot of projects that had to get done. They had no money. Board neglected fund their reserves for many years. And the attorney, after things were getting pretty heated between a couple board members, he made the comment, he said, stop catering to those that can't afford to live here and start catering to those who can. And I thought that was a super powerful comment. Kind of along those same lines, I thought that as you got older, you're supposed to get more patient. But for whatever reason, as I get older, I'm getting less patient. And when I go to some of these meetings, and there is really poor funding, we send the reserve study to management, and the first comment from management is, we can't afford, they can't afford this. Okay, well, how do you know what your 300 units can afford? A, and B, I don't think that's your job. Your job is to help maintain the property, not to pass judgment what all 300 units can afford. Same thing when you hear that from the board president. We can't afford this. Again, how do you know what everybody can afford? What everybody can afford, that's going to vary, right? And the other one is fixed income. We're all on fixed incomes. Well, who isn't on a fixed income? We're all on a fixed income. I get it. I understand it. If I'm a board member at some of these properties, like behind the scenes, I help out with some additional funding for loans or assessments, or we do our best to help. But sometimes these communities are just so bad financially that you eventually got to pay up and get these projects done. Sometimes these reserve studies can be quite daunting, 100 pages. So where do you start? First of all, make sure that reserve study provider got the current contribution, the current balance right. That's easy. If they get the number of units right, that's easy. But I want to really focus on this middle one here in the next 5 years. Long ago, the reserve study industry switched to a 30-year reserve study. That's a long time. Like, am I really going to be working? Some of these projects I'm putting on the radar screen for 28 years from now, am I still going to be working? I don't think so. I So we recommend you focus on the next 5 years. Because those are the projects that you're really low on time to build reserves for, if you're gonna pay for them. So each budgeting season, recommend you look at the next 5 years. Do you think the project's in the right spot? Do you think you need to move it up? Can you move it back? So just separate out those next 5 years as this makes it much more palatable. But again, the bottom bullet, whether you have a reserve study or not, like that discussion in your communities, how do you want to pay for these projects? Reserves, loans, special assessments, where do you guys want to go? And the problem, owners in your community are the ones who don't do any of it. So you got those three options, that's it. They don't do any of those. That's where you really run into the trouble here. So the next 5 years. I hear this term from some people that we use we treat your reserve study as the Bible. And we talked earlier about the expenditure side, which of course it's not. Of course, you shouldn't be looking to do the exact expenditures in the exact years. Of course, we're never going to get that right. That's not the point. But the reserve contributions, though, those really should, if you're deviating from the reserve contributions and you're a board that wants to fund these projects from reserves, you're going to head towards trouble. Reserve contributions are really the key. That's really what, if you're going to look at anything as we have to do this, it's the reserve contributions, not the reserve expenditures. What you provide to owners, that varies. There are some states that require disclosure of the entire reserve study. I don't think Michigan is that state though, right?
It is not currently, but it's in the law that's in the House right now.
Okay, gotcha. So this is gonna maybe go away here, but my personal opinion is to provide the executive summary and that 5-year outlook, and that's it. Executive summary, expenditures for the next 5 years, and that's it. Because you're going to put yourself up to a lot of questions if you're showing expenditures that reserve study I put down there for 25 years from now. It's 5 years in the executive summary. Oops. So then this is an example of that 5-year outlook. Again, it takes what could be quite a few line items that breaks down into just those components that are coming up in the next 5 years. And again, part of that is you're low on time to figure out how to pay for it. So the example of a reserve funding plan.
Are we supposed to be able to see that?
So we can certainly provide this in PDF format if that's hard to see. That's hard to see. So reserve funding plan. I'm not so sure you distribute this to so there's lots of ways to fund these projects. So it's really a board decision. I'm not big on providing this to owners because again, board can figure out some, they can mix it. They're going to have their own opinion of how to fund these projects, regardless of what that reserve providers show here. But green highlighted line are the reserve contributions, the annual contributions. If you were to fund these projects from reserves, and then you see a low point where there's the low points in your cash flow. Those are the governing years. So in other words, back to that phasing comment. Now, if you can phase project, what year is that?
26.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you can phase projects all the way to 2029, past those low points, you're in business. You're going to help. Phasing, rearranging the deck chairs prior to that, you're just costing yourself money. So you gotta understand where the low points in your cash flow are before you decide on phasing. So obviously, this report is the high use case. It's obviously budget season. Budget season, you pull it out, you look at the next 5 years. What are the contributions? Can we do that or not? But there's some other benefits here. If you are, if there is a need for a special assessment, this reserve study will help provide that backing, provide that guidance as to where's the shortfall. Not going to put away this much in reserve contributions. We're a special assess to make up that difference. Here's this is the backing for that special assessment. If you need to go the loan route, there are banks that may require reserve studies because they want to know in the repayment period, do you have anything else big coming up that could impact your ability to repay those loans? So not every bank does that, but there are more and more banks out there that require a fairly up-to-date reserve study. And if you're going out to bid for projects, the reserve study is going to provide sort of benchmarking. What's a reasonable cost? What's a reasonable scope of work? Are you way off? That reserve study cost is way off from what you're getting. I'd call that reserve study provider. Hey, what's the deal? We're getting costs way higher than what you have in here. Is there a different scope of work? What's the deal? Which that reminds me, how would you like to be a reserve study provider during COVID? Like the lumber shortage, the decking, and the calls we got with people, hey, reserve advisors, we have to replace our wood decks. And it's like double the cost you guys had. So, I mean, that's a tough conversation. I certainly would never predicted that. Reserve studies require periodic updates. So we're taking a fresh look at everything and getting them up to date. Of the states that require reserve studies, it's that 3 to 5 years. So my personal opinion is there isn't a one size fits all update interval. Older, more complex communities probably got to get their studies updated more often. Newer, less complex communities can they get away with a bit longer. As much as I tried to convince Lee to change the 5 years in the Michigan legislation to 3, they're sticking with 5. And that's what most associations, that's what most states are at the moment. And that's probably good for most people here, but maybe you have some big ticket projects that you are, that you just completed, like dust settle those big ticket projects. That might be a good time to take a fresh look and reset everything. Maybe you're trying to figure out how to pay for some big ticket projects. So it's right before the project. Maybe that's a good time to take a fresh look. So every community is going to be a little bit different. And what we really want to see is the rate of deterioration. Each time we visit a community, is something aging better than we thought? It's aging better than we thought, let's move it out. What if it's aging worse than we thought? Or maybe you're preventative maintenance, you were doing a good job the last time, now you're not doing a good job of preventive maintenance, unfortunately you might have to move the project involved. So we want to see the rate of deterioration each year we get there so that we can better massage the timing of these projects. So I know the most boring graph you guys have ever seen, plus it says Florida. But this is, so I'm gonna get to Michigan here in a moment. Let's set the stage. So this, I know, super boring, but this to us, this was really exciting. We went back to 1991 and plotted in our major states how often people get their reserve studies up to date. Florida, the concept of reserve studies has been around for a long time. So they're just about the 3-year mark. So that's pretty good. That's one of the more frequent of the states that we do a significant amount of work in. Another state here, Illinois, Chicago specifically. Again, it's not a question in Chicago if you're going to get a reserve study, it's when and who you're going to hire to do it. And so just under the 4-year mark. And you go to Michigan, and Michigan is further out. It's actually further out than most states, 4 years or so. So taking longer for communities to get their studies up to date. And so you take this and combine it with this, and I want to make a couple points. So there's some things you don't want to do worse than Florida.
Is there anything that you want to be worse than that?
So why is this? And I'd be interested in your thoughts. I don't know. I'm just going to throw out there that is it the management companies? And there's a city, I'm not going to name, where our engineers don't want to do studies because every study is a financial disaster. And in that city, there's only a handful of management companies. These management companies, they feel like the way they keep accounts is to save money. Take the lowest bidder on everything. Come budget season, it's everything they can do to minimize and even keep fees flat. So I know in that city that the management companies are part of that issue. Take another flip side of that, another city, the top management companies, they require these certain amount of reserves to even take on an account. So that's a whole different ballgame. So I don't know the answer to this, why this is like this, but I'd be curious your thoughts afterwards if you have any thoughts. Why Michigan seems to be behind. They're not doing reserve studies as much here. They're not getting them updated either. And first-time studies are underfunded more than just about everywhere else in the country. Again,
But you have to look at how many condo complexes are in each state before you can actually determine the percentage, between Michigan and Florida.
Yeah,
We
certainly.
may have more, therefore, it's just a guess.
Yeah, no, like, obviously a good guess. Obviously Florida's got a ton of community association, far more than Michigan. And that's why we focus down on a percent.
Economy.
Got it, okay, good guess. So CAI recognized that a quality reserve study combined with proper preventative maintenance can lead to safe, desirable, and financially secure communities. And thus they made some changes to the reserve study requirements, their standards. I heard the saying that says financial integrity leads to structural integrity. I like that saying. If you have the money to take on the project in a timely manner, you're going to be able to maintain your structures. So reserve study providers, for most of you in Michigan, I think this is business as usual, as the two biggest reserve study providers here have always done this for a long time, including preventative maintenance. I don't know about everyone else, but we now have to disclose within our reserve studies if you're on top of your preventative maintenance, yes or no. We have to also include preventative maintenance. What kind of preventative maintenance is recommended to maximize the useful life of your components? And obviously the overall theme here is the overall life cycle costs and trying to get people to get to the small cracks and become big cracks, to get to the minor issues before they result into the units. So as I mentioned earlier, I pretty much only do reserve studies on high rises now. And one of my questions is, okay, what's the history of facade repairs? And I'll often quite get, well, if it leaks, we fix it. In other words, that's all they do is chase leaks. But there's no preventative maintenance in there. There's no getting to the minor issues before it leaks into a unit. So they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars chasing leaks each year, when several years ago, they should have been on top of their preventative maintenance before it leaks into the units. So an incredibly basic example, super basic example. But my point here in this example is that even a slight reduction in the useful life of a component can have a negative impact on your overall cash flow. So roofing, if it even gets reduced by a year or two, it's going to have a negative impact on your overall cash flow. So sometimes spending that money on preventative maintenance to maximize the useful life of that component is certainly money well spent. Another little, underfunded associations, there's this tendency to cut preventative maintenance. It's really easy to cut that preventative maintenance. And it obviously leads to issues with the remaining useful life of that component down the road. There's another little twist here in this discussion that is fairly new to me. Insurance companies that are starting to use reserve studies to evaluate risk. In other words, deferred maintenance of poor conditions, they elevate the risk. And thus insurance companies are using that as justification for increasing premiums above and beyond what they would normally increase. So timely maintenance, the property being in sound condition, it minimizes that risk for safety, for structural integrity to that insurance provider, and it in turn has been mitigating insurance premiums. Now that's a concept that's new to me. When I first heard about this on the East Coast, where it kind of started, I didn't really believe that, but the KS managers here today told me that their insurance providers are asking for reserve studies. So it is certainly something they're using to evaluate their risk and their premium. I assume here in Michigan, just like everywhere else, insurance premiums are a problem, right?
Yeah, not at all.
No, yeah.
They're going down right there.
Bad everywhere. Florida is out of control. It's really a challenge everywhere at the moment.
Well, we're even seeing in Michigan, it's more high rise again, which I know none of you are from high rises, but a lot of insurance carriers are either not renewing or canceling insurance policies once they see a reserve study, and they're like, and we ain't touching that, we're canceling your insurance. So that's even more substantial than just increasing premiums.
I think it's even worse in Wayne County, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, there's some, Detroit is the worst for that. We have several properties that are high rises there. No insurance companies,
They have to self-fund.
they have to go into a high risk insurance policy, so they get a little insurance from 10 different insurance companies, and it costs 10 times the price.
That's because they had a reserve.
Correct. Because they have.
It discloses the problems.
Correct.
Part of this issue too is now you have people reading reserve studies who never did before, insurance providers, mortgage lenders. I had a call yesterday from a branch property manager. They were denied a mortgage, a prospective buyer was denied a mortgage because the reserve study showed some minor water filtration through one of their garage floor slabs, and they said that needed to be fixed. Well, so then I have to send a letter back, like, this is unbelievably minor, this is normal, no need to fix this right away, this is a non-issue. But who looks at just a one minor leak and says we're not going to deny that mortgage? It's a whole new world of people looking at these studies who have no idea what they're looking at. So a couple concluded points here, and then we will open it up to questions. First concluded point is that use, that concept of the use. Like, people always ask me, how can we convince our owners to put away these reserve contributions? And I know that's hard, I get it. I don't have the sales skills to get that across to people, but that concept of use, you're paying for the use. You're not setting aside money for a project down the road, you're paying for the use of that road each year you live there because you use that road each year you live there. I know, I get it's easier said than done. Second comment here, the fiduciary responsibility of the board of directors is to maintain the investment in the owners. It's not to pay people money. And I'm not saying you take the highest bidder, you don't consider costs. At the end of every decision, you have to answer yes to, did I maintain the investment in the owners? And try my best when I meet with board members to walk through a reserve study and to kind of set that mindset that today we're talking about maintaining the investment in the owners. We're talking about maintaining property values. For many years, probably still, I mean, it seemed to be more prevalent years ago, but board members would run on, I'm not increasing your fees, I'm gonna keep your fees low. No fee increases for several years in a row. That never ends well, never ends well. As more buyers, condominium buyers, are educated on these topics, they're asking about reserves. Am I gonna hit with special assessment, hit with paying more than my fair share? So it can at times, and in several communities, that prospective buyers come in, they flash their healthy reserve balances based on an updated reserve study. Like, look, you're not paying more than your fair share. You're not going to get hit with a special assessment. We have reserves for these projects, and that's a good selling tool for some communities. And then finally, in my experience, communities who have reserves available for these projects, they just seem better run. They can take on the project in a timely manner. They can take on a project without cutting corners. They're just better off. So again, I'm not here to push you setting aside reserves, but there is something to those communities being better off and better run because they have the money on hand to take on the project when it's needed. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for their time and your attention. We can open this up to any question. I can go back to any topic. Is there any question online or in person that we can help you with?
I have one on your preventative maintenance. What constitutes in this realm for preventative maintenance?
So if it's asphalt pavement, it would be staying on top of crack repairs. If you have a flat roof, it's staying on top of the perimeter sealants. If you have siding that has caulking sealants, it's staying on top of those sealants before you get water leaking behind those sealants. So it's anything that you can do to maximize the life of that component. If you give me specific components, I might be able to give you a more direct answer on that.
What about where you have a shift in the land where the property is on, and we have one unit that has a problem, a structural problem that appears?
Wow, that's a big one.
Yeah,
That's a tough one.
yeah.
So that might be now preventative maintenance. That's not a preventative maintenance issue now. That's a structural integrity issue that is going to, depending on what had exactly happened, obviously that's going to be big dollars to fix that issue.
Could it have been started as a preventative maintenance problem? maybe.
Maybe if so, when I see that, one of the things I think of is stormwater drainage off your roofs. Sometimes you see stormwater drainage that's not getting far enough away from buildings, it's draining back towards the buildings. And I have seen that before where that has undermined the foundation, you have some sediment. I have to see your specifics, but something like that, I would say that was the lack of preventative maintenance. You have some structural issues.
Thank you.
I feel bad you have to deal with that. Most boards are not to deal with.
I want to make sure I understand. You had talked about not trying to stretch a project out. We replaced our roofing 5 years ago. It has a 20-year warranty. We should still be putting money in reserve for replacing roofs in 20 years. Is that correct?
You pay for the use, yeah. So everybody, even if that roof is brand new, every year somebody lives in their unit, in theory, they should be paying for the use of that roof. So when time comes again, there's no special assessment, no loan, everybody paid for the use, the money is available. Tough concept though, right? Because your roofs are new. I guarantee you're gonna get people on the other side of that say, I'm not gonna live here when you do roofs.
Yeah, of course. And we do have co-owners that do say that, but they do realize that costs are elevating every year. And the escalation, we've got to be saving for that now. So I think they are prepared for that. I was a little confused when you said only projected 5 years.
Yeah, that's a great point, great point. So regardless of me saying, look at the next 5 years of expenditures, the cash flow analysis is based off a 30-year reserve study.
Okay, thank you.
Sometimes we'll get people say, you know what, we only want you to show the funding plan over the next 5 years too. In other words, they're saying that because they want to forget about everything beyond 5 years. But in reality, no matter where we cut the funding plan at, we have to look at what's off that radar screen where we end our balance. So in theory, we should be coming up with the same contributions, regardless of how many years we show you.
May I ask another question? Is anyone else? We also did a project 3 years ago that became a 5-year project, but they only signed a contract for 1 year. So in other words, they decided to replace fencing. It started out at a bid of $525,000. $525,000, then COVID hit. They'd only signed a 1-year contract. The contract continued to escalate. And now we're going into our 4th year, 2 years left on the project, and we're at $825,000. Should we be pulling money from the reserve for that? Or should we be putting that on the back burner and saying fences are not a structural issue?
I'd have to see your other components that you maintain to give a comment like that, but I'm a little confused. So your $500,000 1-year contract, that was for all the fencing?
Yeah, originally the 525 bid was throughout the 5 years. And so we were just paying it 1 year at a time.
Let's see.
And of course, they didn't have a solid contract for 5 years. So they came back and said, well, costs have gone up. We've lost our labor market, and everything has just continued to go up and up and up. Now this year we're kind of being held hostage because of cost and not having a contract. So, now the squabble is, do we put that on the back burner and keep it on hold for 2 years or a year until maybe life is better?
Yeah.
Or do you pull it from the reserves?
Yeah, I'd have to see your whole cash flow, how everything else, how the other expenditures fit with the fencing. Did you have any comment on that?
Yeah, that fits perfect with what Todd was saying earlier, is don't spread things out over multiple years, because you're gonna, even if you do have a contract, no contractor is gonna go out 5 years typically. But some like roofing might go 2 or 3, but they're still gonna put that caveat in there that say if oil prices increase for shingles, we're gonna pass that cost on. So that's where you don't want to spread it out over 5 years,
Right.
because
And
that
what a
will
normal
happen.
contract would say with increase of 10% for costs, that's okay,
Yeah, that's typical.
right?
So I live in a site condominium subdivision, so our common elements and shared maintenance are gonna be significantly different than roofs and siding and fencing. We have roads and sidewalk and water detention basins and that. So I guess as far as I know, I've been in our subdivision 22 years on the board. This is my 3rd year now, and we are not aware of any reserve study being done. So what kind of dollar amounts are we talking to bring on engineering firm in to do the forming of reserve.
Yeah, good question. Even though you're a development site, you still have some pretty important components, stormwater retention systems, the flows. So they can be pretty big dollars
Yeah.
too. So reserve stations typically cost anywhere from 2,500 to 5,000, depending
Well, it's
on.
better than I thought.
How much?
25 to 500 or 5,000.
2,500 to 5,000. I mean, obviously it's big higher rise for a lot more than that.
Right. No climbing required.
Okay. Good questions. I can tell you guys earn your money as board members. Good questions. Anything else? Any other questions?
I have one.
Sure.
So how would you, coach a complex that just had not saved any reserves, had deferred all maintenance, and just didn't have money for major projects? What would you say? Like, you can't even look to the future because you're right here and you have a huge project with not enough money for that one. What would be your, okay, here's how we start.
Yeah, so obviously it's too late to build reserves, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So,
It's a balcony project. It's a catwalk balcony
okay,
project.
so when you're getting deferred either.
You cannot defer.
Yeah, so obviously the near term reserve savings, so again, try to lay out a financial game plan for you. So near term, we have to use loans, special assessment, something like that. We use a loan, we got to figure out, can we repay the reserves, you got to pay the funding. But then afterwards, after the near term pain, can we get you on a future program where you avoid that?
Mhm.
So it's no way around it. It's gonna be hard in the near term, but when the dust settles on that project, can we get you on a plan to pay afterwards? And
Mhm.
you don't have to mess with it. And same thing in your community, like those owners are gonna get more than their fair share.
Right, because it has been pushed back.
Yeah, and that was similar with us.
Yeah.
I mean, our annual dues had raised in nearly 13 years. I mean, we were paying $300 a year, you know, for 15 years, and went to $370 a year. And we made the mean rule and we doubled it. We bumped it up to $600 a year. And I like your quote, you know, don't cater to the ones who can't live there. I'm like, it's $50 a month. I see you all posting your expensive bourbons, your kids' travel sports, your boats and your RVs. It's like, you can afford $50 a month to maintain, right? And we don't have much reserves for road projects, and the bond money is gone, and, you know, so.
There's a community, the community, if you know Chicago or Michigan Avenue, Lakeshore Drive kind of come together, we would all know their last names, this community. We've been in the reserve state since 1991, we're there for 3 years. For many, many years, they special assess for everything. So whatever the project costs are for the year, capital projects, it's divided by number of units, they special assess every single year. Well, they're starting to get some, it's all old money. So they're starting to get some new money in there. And just recently, new money moves in, gets hit with a special assessment, in this case for the freight elevator. The guy says, I don't even know where the freight elevator is. I'm paying you $15,000 for this. Like, I'm not doing this. What's the deal? Where's the reserves? And so there's now all of a sudden this community that's gone 100 years is conflict because you get the new money saying, I'm not paying for this stuff. You guys should have been paying for all along. And the old money saying, this is how we've done it all along. You are paying for this. And it's quite a wreck.
Well, and I think Sharon, you made a great point there of, so you have these impending projects, you're gonna have to do a loan, a special assessment, some big chunk, but it's important then to not say, okay, that's done. Drop dues back down, get rid of assessments,
Right.
is
Right,
to
yeah.
then say, okay, what's next in the next 5 years? And make sure you're planning for it then, so you're not having to do another assessment, another loan in 5 years.
And that's when we went from 400 to 600 a year. It's like, that's $200 more a year. And, you know, is this just a one-time thing? We're like, no, we haven't been putting money into reserves for future projects and that sort of thing. And concrete costs have increased. You know, I'm like, have you not done any projects pre-COVID and post-COVID? It's like, and some homeowners don't maintain, you know, the exterior paint and trim and windows and landscaping, and but like pine trees that live forever. It's not pretty.
I think a great point by me. One little other quick story here. The worst finding. So I asked KS managers earlier today, they heard the word deconversion and they said no. So I assume you guys have never heard the word deconversion either, right? So deconversion is a new phenomenon where condominium associations are deconverting back to rentals. And in every case, it's because the condominium association is in such financial disarray that they have to sell to a developer or an owner, turn it back to rentals. The worst financial situation I've ever seen. The association took out loan after loan after loan. And instead of special assessing for the repayments, they're trying to repay from their reserves. So there's several loans. Their entire reserve contribution goes towards loan payments, but they're heading towards massive, massive projects. Roofing, sod, this is a big facility in Chicago. They have to look at a deconversion. There's no other option. It's a fairly low income community and there's no option. So that's the worst I have ever seen. You guys are probably nowhere in the ballpark of that. I appreciate everyone's time. It's great to see everybody. And thank you guys for attending.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, anyone on, most of them, they dropped off, but anyone online have any questions?
I want to say thanks to you, Todd. You did such a great job. It's a lot of information to take in and it's big concepts, but you broke it down nicely.
I appreciate that. Great job by KS.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I appreciate all of you coming here too, as board members. You know that we emphasize education here at KS and we want you to be here. So your volunteerism is amazing. And the fact that you're showing up and trying to learn a little bit more about these things is really, really important. We do have our next educational seminars coming up. And it was a suggestion from one of you, our board members, of having something where it was a training, right, on what it is to be a president, vice president, and so on, all the roles within the board. So keep this in mind over the next few months because we're going to have that. And if you have somebody that might be interested in volunteering, or you have somebody that just started out, you know, as a treasurer and wants to know more, we're going to have that here again in at KS and then also virtually offering that. And it will take suggestions. Think about it, you know, as you kind of chat on your way out. If you have any ideas for educational seminars coming up, something that is like a high level topic for you or for your community, let me know and we can kind of build something out based off of that. And then our expo is coming up in October. So that's going to be the next education seminar that we have is going to be basically our big expo, and that's going to be out in Livonia at Schoolcraft College. We pivoted a little bit this year and turned it into, it's going to be board member and resident appreciation. We're going to do like a brunch and have all of our vendors there, and you know, maybe almost we'll see. Those things that we'll try to get them there. But I will say it's a really nice, you know, there were a couple of comments that Todd had mentioned about the real estate aspect of things, the mortgage aspect of things. And we are huge proponents of education as a whole. So we're really excited because we have KS management and we noticed through community management that there were needs within maintenance. And so we have a sister company that does maintenance, helps out a lot of in different ways for your maintenance needs. And we also have a landscaping company that was, each one of these has kind of come from what we found as feedback or you know, all the different touch points that you need as a community as a whole. So we decided to help educate from the ground up. As we have a new mortgage company, KS Mortgage Group, and we're working with realtors to expand the idea of what it is to live in an association. And I know it's frustrating for you as a board member when somebody moves in and they're like, oh, what are these dues? You know, it's unfortunate that is the temperature of how it is. But it's very common for us as a management company to have new residents call us up and say, you know, what's going on? You know, I didn't understand this or that about living in an association. So we created Association Simplified, just a really nice little booklet. And I'd love for you to take it with you. You can, I mean, you already know a lot of this as a board member, but if you know somebody that's wanting to live in an association or just has a couple of thoughts about it, this, you know, breaks down your role in the community, or maybe you have a resident that maybe needs a little reminder, a friendly reminder.
Well, you do not cover your steps.
and embracing the benefits of living in an association. As a board member, it's hard to break down the fact that you can do this, but you cannot do that. And this, says it in a way that it emphasizes that it's for the betterment of your community as a whole. A reserve study is for the betterment of your community as a whole. It's not like you're the meanie that wants to, throw these things down. So we have Josh here with our KS Mortgage Group. He's also the Director of Operations here, just came on with KS Management, and Chris came from EXP Real Estate.
Yes.
So we have a lot of different resources for you now, and we're kind of finding ways to make it a little more convenient for any one of your residents, your owners or co-owners that as they're moving in or they're moving out, that we can help with the education aspect of that. So I'm gonna leave these here. Josh, you wanna talk a little bit at all about,
Do you give those out as a welcome to each person?
that is what so through the
Okay.
mortgage aspect of it, when they come to us for a loan, this will be a part of it is, so we're gonna say with, in collaboration with realtors and with our mortgage company, we're gonna give them the education and help them to understand that.
Oh, but I mean, every single one who moves in, when you start taking their funds, do you give one? Okay.
Yes. Yeah, we have.
We have a welcome packet.
Okay, yeah, yep.
Here, I'll hand these out to you. Yeah.
Great.
We hope they read it, but.
Yeah, well,
And I can give you a stack too, if you think they'll be useful, and you can, get those out to your community members. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Will,
And there is HOA.
will the new
and,
mortgage company do funding for like loans for the association?
Yes.
Not right now.
Not yet.
Maybe in the future.
We do have like a company that we partnered up with as well for association loans, that we can broker out.
Yeah, because it's gonna be, to try and figure out what's the best mix of like.
We are trying to come up with everything possible to make sure that associations have some resource to come to. And mortgage is one, because at the end of the day, you want your neighbors that are moving in to be educated, they know exactly what's going on. And we partnered with EXP, so you'll see us a lot, probably emails and things like that, just so you guys have another resource to come to, and you can reach out to us with any questions.
And it'll be beneficial for the residents and the board members as well, just for having real estate agents that are more informed on how associations work. So
Yes.
we do plan to attend a lot more of these, just so we can learn how things work on the back end. Like I said, you will get new residents that will call you additions that they didn't, plan on having, because maybe their agent didn't know what to ask, didn't know what to look for. A lot of times condos are a very small portion of their transactions. If you're only doing a couple of years, you might not know what to ask, things like that. So the more that we know, the more beneficial it is for everybody involved. It's a smoother transaction for the buyer, for the seller, and for the board members as well, the management company, to get less aggravated calls saying, I didn't know, we're gonna go about looking at this, what's included in this.
Right.
A lot of things that they're going to simplify it for the buyers as well, that we can include in our buyer consultations for someone who's looking for a condo, or just the ease of what you need to do before selling a condo, because when you come in and purchase, you may have not sold one before, so we will know on the back end how that works, and kind of make it a smooth process for everyone involved.
Well, we've been doing classes now like this for board members, and now we're certified with the state to teach them for realtors. Because as Chris said, there's a lot of realtors that maybe they don't do a high volume of condo sales, or maybe they just don't know, no offense.
Right.
But
Well, I
you
think
want to
that's
do
a,
those.
with us being a slight condominium or single dwelling, there's a lot of residents that, oh, I'm gonna buy this house.
Yeah.
And then they get to closing and they're getting presented, our bylaws, and they're like, what is this? What does
Wait a
this
minute, I need
mean?
permission to paint my front door?
Yeah.
And then we'll get that a year later.
Oh, we had that. Baby poop brown, yellow. It's just like, oh my God. It's like,
I love the advertisement, I forget what company it was for, and it was the realtor that came with the scissors.
Violation.
Well, and in our education, we did have our first course for real estate agents. And it was interesting to see, like, when we use terms, we talk, of course, use the term of a reserve study or a maintenance matrix, and that terminology was not something that a lot of realtors have ever heard of. So when they're moving in to understand like when a special assessment is coming up, that's all part of the information that they need to be educated on as a buyer. So that's where we're kind of coming in and trying to help out as much as possible to make things easier for you and to make things, you know, more streamlined for the management company, the real estate agents, our mortgage group, and for the board members.
Do you ever have educational seminars for co-owners? We had someone that asked, I know that's a scary thought.
Every day.
I did have someone that asked if they could attend with us today because they want to run for the board in May. So they wanted to get a better understanding of how the financials work now before running. And so I just
So
wondered.
that person, yes.
Yes.
The other one. But so our expo that we do once a year, I know it's only once a year, but we invite co-owners to that one. So we had like Todd was a speaker last year. At that seminar, co-owners could attend, board members. But we welcome if you have as board members, if there's people in your community that like want to serve on a committee or they're going to be running for the board, bring them to these classes. We're
Yeah,
fine with
for
that.
sure.
Well, no, next time.
Yeah, please do. They are
We want to educate everyone because it makes our lives easier. So,
Excellent.
When is that role training or, you know? seminar?
it's gonna be in early June. I don't have a date specifically yet. Because we actually have someone from CAI Michigan that's coming. Because CAI Michigan actually teaches a course specifically that board members can go to. So I'm dragging her into this one to kind of help co-teach it and talk about what that means to board members as well.
Alice just is in the course, right?
Yeah, I know we have 2 board members that are new since our election, and it's like, you guys gotta do some stuff.
Right. Yeah, and that's what we'll break those things down and kind of simplify it. But then also if they want to take it to the next level, that there is a resource in CAI. I mean, we use CAI, you know, day in and day out as far as all of the different resources they have. One of the magazines is over here, and we also have our KS magazine. It has a lot of great information in there as well. But yeah, that's coming from you. So we want to hear more, right? Because it really matters is we can think of reserve studies and we could do, you know, trainings and educational seminars and things that we experience as a management company, but this is for you as a board member. So we're happy to get your feedback on that.
I think it's useful to hear other people's experiences too,
Yeah.
and what they're going through.
Yeah.
you know.
Right.
And I guess since there's legislation in Michigan for this reserve study, when is that decision gonna be made that we, is that gonna be made this year that we should
You asked
prepare?
the right person. First of all, he's on the legislative committee.
Yeah, so I'm actually on the legislative action committee for Michigan. So it is, we crafted this, the verbiage for this bill to be very aggressive. Because right now there's nothing, it's very lax. So we presented this, it went to the House of Representatives, it went out of committee, they approved it. And it's on the floor right now, going to be introduced in April to the House. We anticipate the House will pass it as is. But the Senate may drag their feet on it a little, because like Todd was mentioning of the funding component. So we want to make it part of the law that not only you have a reserve study, but you have to fund what it says, because it does no good if you have it, but you don't follow it. So the
So to
language.
raise that 10% threshold.
Because like he said, the 10% is arbitrary,
Right.
that like your community, 10% of your budget is not gonna pay for your roads.
Yeah. I mean,
That
it's
doesn't matter.
$12,000 a year.
Yeah. So that's where I think the sticking point is gonna be, because the language that we proposed in the bill is saying you have to fund it 100%, whatever your reserve study says. So that's a financial burden to some. So I think there's gonna be a little back and forth and wiggle room on that, but I
Okay.
still say this year.
Okay,
Do you feel personally that it should be that way? He seemed to really feel like you do it however you want to do it, assessment, loans.
Yes, I'm a proponent of spreading it out over the years.
Yeah.
So I would say fund your reserve studies.
Yeah.
Or fund your reserve accounts rather, throughout several years rather than hit that assessment. Cause I've seen several times that, I won't pick on your community, but there's stuff that just comes up and you're
Yeah.
like, oh crap, what do we do? And it's expensive. And I've seen that so many times now that I always say like, throw money in there. Don't
Yeah.
put 10% in. That's not gonna do anything.
Well, one of our board members says that, you raise the HOA to fund your reserves, it makes a decline in the value of the condo. And so, you know, he's always happy to do assessments
Right.
when they come.
Well, and there's some, like, we've had communities like that. The one example he
He
gave,
get that one.
where they want to, I'll pick on realtors, sorry, but it's easier to sell.
We're used
The
to.
beans in it.
When it's a low
Yeah, so
HOA
it's
fee.
easy to
Yeah.
sell the unit,
Yeah.
and hey, we only have $200 HOA fees,
Right.
but then when you look at the reserve study and you say, oh crap, 5 years from now, I'm gonna have a 10 grand assessment, that $200 a month doesn't look so
Right.
good.
Right.
And on the other hand, if your payout for HOAs is in the arrears, you have a certain percentage, you can't get a mortgage anyway.
Correct.
So, I mean, you've got to kind of balance that. It's a
Yeah.
balancing act, I'm sure, but
Lee, what's the, since you were involved in the, legislation, if it does pass the Senate, what's the rollout period gonna be?
So we have a burn-in period for it we proposed it as 3 years. But that could change. So anyone that doesn't have a reserve study currently would have 3 years to get one in place. And then, like Todd said, we put a 5-year cap in there where you have to review it every 5 years.
Do we have enough reserve study guys out there?
That's why I was just wondering.
We
Yeah,
do?
there's some.
Okay.
So Reserve Advisors is one that we always go to. They're one of the best, but there's dozens of them.
Like we said, he did come in from Milwaukee, somebody was asking about the phone number there. So yeah, but we make sure that we bring in the best for you. And like the details of, you know, the underground, all of those things, it's not just what's right in front of your eyes, but it takes it to a deeper level.
Yeah, that's kind of.
Because there are some reserve companies out there that they'll do a reserve study and it's $800 and here you go. And some boards are like, ooh, cool, it's cheaper, but they're not looking at the detail that companies like his look at, so. it's important to-
Okay, how does that work if the unit is now under refinanced as a, reverse mortgage? How does that work for the reserve study?
As far as what? I don't, like if the individual has a mortgage, that's now a reverse
That was
mortgage.
sold to, the reverse mortgage.
So they would still be responsible to pay the same
Who is
that everyone else would, whoever owns
the
it.
current owner.
Okay, so it would be the lien holder.
Correct.
Okay.
And this kind of piggybacks off of this, just a real quick thing. I think most of us are 55+ communities, but
No, you're the only one.
yeah.
I mean, so generally, people that live in condo associations are 55+, but you're the only one that is designated as such.
All right, so
that-
fine. Are there any, again, this kind of piggybacks on it, but are there any kind of grants that we can look into since it's a senior complex, for doing long-term projects?
There are some out there. I've seen some like high rises or
Mm-hmm.
like those that are designated as historic properties. I'm sure there's some for that type as well. I haven't seen any personally, but I'm sure they're out there. I just don't know what those look like.
Okay.
Can I get back to this legislation, if I may?
Yeah.
If the bill, as you know, it was to pass both the House and the Senate, and you say that there's a rolling period of 3 years, which means 2027. A community that gets a reserve study and says that they have, say, $1 million worth of repairs that have to be done over the next 5 years. And they have $0 in the reserve. Will that mean that they will have to fund
Within that 3 year
the $1
period.
million in 5 years as opposed to?
That's how it's written currently, yes.
But the reserve
Rule.
study doesn't say that they have to have the project done. The reserve study just says you have to get, the law says you have to have a reserve study, right?
And that
Doesn't mean you have to do the project.
No,
you have to fund it.
You have to fund the
You would
reserve.
have to fund it if it's a structural issue that you have to get done.
No, that's not the way it's, that's not the way it's.
That's
Oh, I'm
anything that's in
confused.
your
I thought the
reserve study.
law was stating that.
That's Florida
the
law.
reserve study
That's
has to
Florida
be
law.
done. Michigan's new law is saying that the reserve study must be completed,
Whoa.
but I didn't know it was determined you had to have the work done as well.
No, have it
No, we
funded.
have it funded.
Understand the funding.
If you have funded, you might as well do it.
So if you fund it, or if you do it, that would be considered as part of the funding. So, okay.
Yeah, it'll take in.
It'll take
any
it off of
expenses that
the-
are- Yeah, it'll drop off your.
Okay, so how do we kill this bill?
So the funding aspect is the one that I was saying I think is up for some fights. I think the House and the Senate are gonna support the bill as you have to have a reserve study. There's no question there.
Mhm.
It's the funding aspect that I think is gonna be, cause some heartburn.
So
Well,
if you
especially
have that
for
reserve,
condos that have no reserve in place.
if you have that
Well,
reserve study and
right,
find
they
something
bought-
and there's a catastrophe though, you are liable then. So that
Yeah.
actually holds you accountable to a certain degree.
Well, and that's part of the bill is that there has to be disclosures that the
Right.
community each year saying, hey, we're 100% funded or not, or here's where we're at. Because there's no condo police. There's no one
Yeah.
coming around, hey, did you do your reserve study? But it's all the owners in the community that know, hey, this law's in place. And if the board isn't adhering to it, then they come after you guys. So that's the key find it.
So I'm already thinking about reserve study people who are like, okay, just don't disclose everything. All right,
Too bad.
that can't happen.
Yeah. We thought of that.
Our reserve study was not good. It did not address any of the major things that have come up. So the reserve study companies are gonna play a major role in this, you know.
Well, and to Lee's credit, we had a reserve study and the reserve study suggested so much money be put in the reserves and our board didn't follow that.
Oh,
So
Yeah.
that became an issue or
Yeah.
has become an issue.
yeah.
Well, they usually, those of you that have reserve studies, they usually lay out a plan and say, okay, here's option 1, 2, or 3. I
Right.
mean, they're like, here dues and increase them, I'm making up numbers, but $10 a year for the next 3 years. Or you can do a special assessment in year 3 and 5, or you can do a combination of this. So
Yeah.
they usually present those types of options. But then, like you said, it's up to the board to say, hey, we're gonna bury our head in the sand, or we're gonna do
Right.
option 1, we're gonna do option
Yeah.
2. And then the onus will be on the board then if this bill passes to say, because then they have to disclose it to the whole community when you mail out the budget and say, hey, we're not funding or we're ignoring it and hoping for the best. So,
Are the local tri-counties weighing, Livingston, Macomb, like Oakland, are they more concentrated amounts of associations in the state of Michigan versus your UPs and mid-Michigan and that?
so there are actually surprisingly a ton up north and in the UP, but they're mostly self-managed and mostly run by, real estate agents that try and do like property management on the side. So that's where it gets scary because they don't necessarily know the industry or they don't know the law that pertains to it. So that's where a lot of this legislation is kind of heading in Michigan, is to put more structure in the law so that people know what to adhere to and what to focus on. For those that are self-managed or those that have like a CPA just doing their books and the board hopes for the best.
That's good to know. So it's not just legislators from the lower peninsula that are more concerned. So it is a statewide.
Yeah, actually, one of the sponsors of the bill is from the UP. So
There's probably a little, those roads aren't maintained by counties, so they probably do get a lot of.
yeah, they get lost in it up there. So.
So the summer
you so
home counties, HOAs, any HOA will have to follow this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the Michigan Condo Act kind of has a broad umbrella, so it covers site condos, HOA subdivision, PUDs, it covers all of that, so.
House or whatever.
Go ahead and take one of those magazines with you if you like, if you don't already have one, it has an article in there about the reserve studies and everything else you can think of. Cards are out there on the table. Do you guys have a realtor that is, part of your board at all? Yeah, okay, I have a bag for that. If you wanna take it with you, you can give that to them. And just keep us in mind, if you have somebody that is moving out or that's, thinking about moving, that we do have the person. If you work with us as a mortgage company, we'll educate the person coming in, right? Thinking about those things, I appreciate it. It was nice to see you.
Uh,
Hi, good